I need, and this is a question I ask everyone, I need to know your full name, your birth name, I need to know your date of birth, and I need to know where you were born.
Okay. My name's Norma Webb, and I was born on December 29th, 1925, on the third floor of a bank building in the heart of Little Italy. And I was delivered at home by Dr. Frank Trippi, who was one of the pioneer doctors in Little Italy. And it was a difficult birth, but we managed. The bed broke. My mother fell on the floor with doctor with forceps on my head, but the delivery went off after that without a hitch. Here I am, 85 years later, to tell about it.
Very good. So now let's step back a little bit, and if you could, just tell me a little bit about your parents.
Well, my parents came from a little town in Italy on the Lazio-Tuscany border. It's called Onano, O-N-A-N-O, and they were the only two from our immediate family who emigrated from Italy. My father came in 1920, and my mother followed him in 1921, and they settled in Little Italy at 444 West 16th Street. It was a bank building. It was called the Bank of America, but it was an Italian bank founded by John Phillips, who was its president. The bank went defunct in 1933. However, a lot of people lost money. Most people rented and were trying to save for a home, but as I said, they lost a lot of money when the bank folded.
The first question on this list, and I'm going to kind of tweak it a little bit for you. The first question here is what are your first memories of growing up Italian? When did you first know that you're Italian and not something else?
Well, I think the first that I knew that was when I went to first grade at Columbus School. I didn't attend kindergarten, although it was available, but somehow or other my parents neglected to enroll me in kindergarten, so I went to first grade and I couldn't speak English. And there were a lot of children just like me. We all grew up speaking Italian in our homes because our parents could not speak English. And so when I went to school, there were very, very few Americans, we call them Americans, but who did not speak Italian, and they kind of made fun of us. And so that was my first idea that something was wrong, that I needed to expand my horizons a little bit. And we started to learn from Dick and Jane. There were no English as a second language classes. We had to learn whatever the teacher taught us. And little by little we learned, and then we would take our books home and practice with our parents. And soon our parents learned Dixie, Jane, see Spot, and so on and so forth. So as we learned English, they learned English. And that made for a pretty good cooperation. They were anxious to learn, and they were proud that we were learning something different from a book with foreign words to them. And so that was my first idea that, something was wrong and we needed to really expand a little bit.
Tell me about your parents in terms of their work.
Well, my father died when he was 33, and he was a trombonist with the Erie Orchestra, the Ciamfoni Band, which was one of the pioneer symphony bands in Erie. They used to play for all the operas and plays at the Park Opera House, which was located on Peach Street. It was later the Colonial Theater, and then I think it's ever since been demolished, I'm not sure. But he was a trombonist with the orchestra. And my mother learned tailoring when she was in third grade, and she was a very, very talented tailor, and she worked at a men's clothing store in downtown Erie, P.A. Myers and Sons, as a tailor.
You mentioned that you taught them in many ways some of the English, and I'm just curious, did that put new responsibilities onto you, the responsibilities that you as a child wouldn't normally carry because you had to do translation or teach them?
Well, not really, because for me, it was a learning experience. It was part of, what I was learning in school in order to progress in other subjects. But for me, it was also a sense of pride that I was teaching my parents something, and they learned from that. And then, as I said, with my mother working in a men's clothing store, little by little, she developed a larger vocabulary and was able to communicate quite well. When my mother remarried, she married my father's first cousin. In those days, I think when a widow was left with small children, she had buried two sons, two babies. Of course, they had communicable diseases, which at that time there were no antibiotics and there was no hope for their recovery. One had meningitis and one had measles. And so she married my stepfather and then had two more children. My stepfather worked for the city of Erie with the water department, and he was ill a lot, and so most of the household income was derived from my mother's work. And our family started to grow. The children, my sisters started to grow up and become integrated. And little by little, we were Italian Americans then. And later on, I went on to become a nurse. I went to St. Vincent's Hospital School of Nursing. And my sister was also a nurse, and my other sister worked in the medical field also. So little by little, we made the transition. It was difficult, though, because we lived in the heart of Little Italy, and it was like a city unto itself. We had grocery stores, we had pharmacies, we had doctor's offices, and most everything was within walking distance. And until I went to Roosevelt School, which would have been my in 7th grade, I really didn't know a lot of other children of other nationalities, so we were pretty much isolated.
When you think back now about your everyday life living in Little Italy, do you recognize some unique Italian traditions or customs that played out in your home that
continue? Yes, absolutely. Every custom that my parents observed, we still observe in our home. Not to the extent we did then, because we were clustered, and my mother had paisans, and who have since passed away, that would get together and have expanded celebrations. But in our home, we still celebrate Christmas traditionally, Easter traditionally. We get together often for birthdays. I think one of the traditions in most Italian families is the togetherness that they enjoy on any occasion. It's an occasion to get together and have good camaraderie and exchange stories and remembrances and so on.
and are there any that have slipped away that are not practiced with great frequency?
Not necessarily in my family, but I think as generations start to dilute themselves, and by that I don't mean in anything in a derogatory manner, but intermarriages with other people of other nationalities and so on, there gets to be a dilution and a melding of other traditions. And so the Italian tradition kind of fades away. But I'm lucky enough to say that my children, my daughter, my two boys, are very much into the Italian tradition, even though their father was Swedish-German. And I've encouraged them to look into their other heritage too, but it's stronger in the Italian tradition. And so I nurture that.
I have two questions, and the first one is I'd like you to talk to me a little bit about the power and role of the Catholic Church in your community and in your life.
Yes, in my life, well, it was very, very important. We were like a block and a half. I was born almost next door to the church, but then we moved down the street, which was a block away, and then up the street, and then up the street again. So we went from 16th Street to 17th Street to 18th Street. So we didn't move stray far from where the church was on 16th and Walnut. But I did not go to Catholic school. There was one Catholic school in the neighborhood, and it was St. Michael's. It was a German parish. And some Italians sent their children there if they wanted to have a parochial education. I didn't, but I went to Sunday school every Sunday. We called it catechism. And we went to church every Sunday. We went to church during the week for different functions. So it was really very important in our growing up. It really formed us. I think it helped me with my moral thinking and you know, some of the ideas that I carry through my life was very important.
Now, is the reason that not many Italians sent their kids to St. Michael's, was it because it was a German parish?
Well, not necessarily that, but it was, I think, very few had the means, although there was a tuition. It was probably very, very minimal, but it might have been to the point where they were not able to afford it.
But your parish was probably overwhelmingly Italian.
It was. It was an Italian parish.
Right.
Yes, it isn't until, I think in 1970, when the school closed, that a lot of my generation, which would be first generation Italian Americans, began to have a career, whatever their career was, or the war broke out and they married women, the soldiers married women from other cities or other parts of the city, and we started the suburban escape. And little by little, the church lost a lot of its parishioners. Although I must say, every time there's a special occasion, they flock back. I mean, that the tie is so strong with their Catholic upbringing and the meaning of what St. Paul's Parish was to them, that they always come back. An overwhelming majority of them do.
Can't escape.
Can't escape. No.
You mentioned earlier that some of the kids teased you in school. Can you speak to the teasing or the harassment or the discrimination that you experienced because you were Italian?
Well, you know, when you're just 6 years old and all of a sudden you're faced with the fact that you're different, it's like you don't want to be different for very long, and you want to try to, you know, be like the rest of them. And so you try really hard to meld with whatever their concept is of being American. And so I think we work diligently to learn our lessons, to learn how to speak, to get our parents involved in PTA, which was something completely foreign to them. And I always worried because my mom worked, and it was very, very difficult for her to get a day off to come to plays or anything that we were doing in school. And I always felt kind of bad about that. And I would tell my mom, and she'd say, but Norma, non posso, I can't, non posso, I can't get the day off and so on. So that kind of made me feel badly. But a lot of the mothers, that was an entirely new thing for them to be involved in something, because when you think about it, with a big influx of Italians from Italy or even other countries, we're peasants, and they very seldom were involved in any decision making or any policy making and so on. And to be invited to a school to be able to participate and make decisions was something that was very, very foreign to them. And at Columbus School, we had a teacher. Her name was Miss Mary Perico, and we all remember her with such fondness, and she spoke Italian. And so she was a means of communication with the parents when they came to these meetings and so on. So little by little, the mothers realized the importance it was for them to be involved in their children's education.
Now, in my research on other immigrant groups, it's very common to find that the first generation of a particular native-born group into the United States, there is a tension between them and their parents about their ethnic identity. That the children so want to become American, and the parents are still holding on.
Mhm.
Was there a period in your life as a teenager or whenever where there was resentment about, or kind of almost embarrassment that that's my mom, she's speaking Italian,
right. I remember so vividly, it never really happened a lot, but I remember so vividly, I think I might have been 12 or 13, and my mother took me shopping for a coat. And she was talking to me in Italian, questo è più bello, this is prettier, or questo ti va più bene, in other words, this one fits you better. And I'd say, Mama, no, talk English, talk English. And she'd say in Italian, I don't know how to say that word. So I did. I kind of felt a little reticent that she was speaking to me in Italian while the saleswoman was standing there. And the saleswoman was not Italian. So she wouldn't understand, But really and truly, I never really felt a resentment. My mother always encouraged me to do what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a nurse, and at first she was a little reluctant about that kind of a profession, but when I explained to her how deeply I felt about it, she encouraged me, and she became very proud when I graduated from nurses training. So I wouldn't say that I had a lot of resentment, but there was a lot of that. I think as we got older, my generation got older, and we realized that we wanted them to be as American as we were becoming. And a lot of the women, and men too, did learn to speak English quite well, and a lot still couldn't. As a matter of fact, up until maybe 20 years ago, there were still grandmothers who only spoke Italian in the home. They didn't want to change. But as I said, a lot of them were peasants and just could not escape that mantra, I would say.
Can you, we know that you're on 16th, 17th, and 18th, and you're there in the heart of Little Italy. Can you give us a little more description of the neighborhood? I mean, what was it like? Were people cloistered into their homes, or were they all out in the street? Give me
nobody ever locked their door. They were, as I said, we were self-contained, and as far as all the conveniences, shoemakers, grocery stores, pharmacies, ice cream parlors, pool halls that the men would go to, churches, our church, which was our center. And so you didn't have to go very far. I think the first time that I went to State Street, my mother gave me $1 and said, you can go to J.C. Murphy's, which was the first 5 and 10 on State Street, and you can buy Christmas presents for the family. That was my 2 sisters, my father and my mother. And I remember I got a tie for my father, I got a pair of cotton lisle hose for my mother, a ball for my sister Elvira, and a little tiny purse for my baby sister, and I had 10 cents left over. And I was so proud that I was able to walk from 17th Street to State Street by myself to do my Christmas shopping. So that was my first emerging from my Little Italy safe spot. And as I said, going to Roosevelt School, which was on the berm of Little Italy. It was on 21st and Cranberry. And Little Italy went to Sassafras Street, from Urin Street maybe to 21st Street. So it was quite a large area. And if you had everything you needed, you didn't go out of those confines. The men did. A lot of the men worked at General Electric or Hammermill. They all walked to their work. My mom would pack the black lunch bucket with their thermos of coffee and their sandwiches and so on, and they would walk to work. So that was pretty much our little world.
Your first memories, just by virtue of your age, would put it into the Great Depression.
Yes.
Do you have any kind of stark memories of?
Absolutely very stark memories of the Depression, because you had to be really, in order to work in the city of Erie, It was not a written law, but if you weren't an American citizen, you didn't get the job. And I remember my father got his citizenship in 1938. But before that, he did manage to have some part-time work, and sometimes it was like ditch digging. He was a frail person, and it was hard for him. But then he got his citizenship and got the job at the city. But before that, my mom was our only source of income. And as I recall, she was making 60 cents an hour as a tailor. And we ate a lot of polenta and a lot of bread soaked with spinach water and spinach. My mom canned. She worked till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, sometimes doing things and then going to work. And as I said, my father worked off and on, and it was very, very difficult. We sat on the porch once a week and waited for the city to come with the truck and drop off boxes of food to the homes of those of us who were on welfare. We didn't know it was welfare, but it was welfare. And I remember the box always contained a slab of bacon that we had to slice ourselves, margarine, which was a white lard with a little white pill in it that you had to squash and then keep working the bag till you had a yellow mixture that was supposedly butter, canned meat, prunes, raisins, and 2 or 3 loaves of American bread, which we looked forward to the American bread because it was sliced and it was even. The Italian bread always came in a loaf, and Mama always sliced it a little bit, probably off the angle, and so that was really nice that we got American bread. So we thought we were pretty well off to get American bread, but it was humiliating for a lot of parents. And since everybody rented, if the rent went up, there was mass exodus on April 1st, the trucks pulling up and people, piling their furniture in trucks and moving to a cheaper apartment. My mom, I married in 1949, and my mom bought her first home in 1953. She bought a home with my sisters, and they were grown up by that time, so the 3 of them got together and bought a home. But most people rented.
Now, so it's a self-contained community, which suggests that there's a wide spectrum of people and their incomes and their professions and their levels of education. Were there any tensions within the Italian-American community, the wealthy Italians looking down upon the poorer Italian-Americans?
No, not that I was aware of, but I think there was status. There were people from northern Italy who tended to have maybe a little bit more education. That is, they were literate. And maybe they thought they were a little better. That, in other words, we would say they think they're better than we are. For instance, people from Tuscany and from Milan or Turin and so on. But in a sense, they were a little bit more educated and so on. But, as we started growing up and going to school and becoming educated, my generation became doctors and lawyers and teachers. Being a teacher was a very, very favored profession for girls because you could go to Edinburgh Normal School and get a teaching degree, I think, after 2 years. As a matter of fact, Miss Perico was one of the first graduates from Edinburgh, from our community. And we had Mr. Egidio Agresti, who was the editor of the Italian newspaper. He was instrumental in getting a lot of people interested in becoming literate, because the newspaper was printed in Italian, because Italian people wanted to know what was going on in the world and had no way of communicating, couldn't understand radio, and so they got the printed word. But then when they couldn't read the printed word, there were night school classes for Italian and English. And so that was instrumental in getting people to be a little more literate. A lot could just sign their names, and that was just about it.
Okay, so we moved through the Great Depression, and then as we end the Great Depression, the United States enters war, and the Italian Americans are faced with a new issue in their community.
Absolutely. The issue was we are at war with Italy. And practically every young man in the Italian community that was of draft age, of course, was drafted, but there were many who volunteered. I mean, just about every young man volunteered. Actually, some mothers are pulling their hair out of desperation that their sons were going off to war. And then, of course, that was with Germany and Japan. But then when Italy entered the war, when Mussolini and Hitler made their pact, and Hitler became an Axis, we had many, many mixed feelings. First of all, our families couldn't communicate with their relatives. They had a sense of loyalty to their families in Italy, worrying about them. And yet they were proud to be in America and proud to be Americans. I would say that I never heard of any outright anarchist or socialist or anyone who would denigrate the America in favor of Italy in our community. Now, it probably happened. You know that there were Italians who were segregated or set aside like the Japanese were. Little is known about that, but that did happen. As a matter of fact, Joe DiMaggio parents were among those who were detained in camps. But I digress. Anyway, but that's a known fact. And so I would say that our loyalty was strictly to America. As a matter of fact, we had a young man from Onano, my mother's hometown, who we found out was a prisoner, had been taken prisoner in Libya, North Africa, by the British. And then when the Americans entered the war, was handed back over to the Americans and taken to California as a prisoner of war. And we found out that Ercole was a paisan, and he was a prisoner of war in California, and lonesome, and did we want to write to him. And there were about 10 of us of the paisani from my mother's hometown, girls of high school age, and we were all asked to write to him, and I wouldn't. I said, he's our enemy, I'm not going to write to him. But Sue did, one of my friends, and by golly, after the war, they met, and then she went to Italy, they married. He came to Erie, and he became the best American citizen you'd ever want to meet. So it's really strange. War had its twists and turns. But, we collected scrap and metal and pan lids. I remember, stealing aluminum pans out of my mother's cupboard so I could take them to school for the scrap drive. And, we had rationing, sugar and flour, and a lot of things that I think young people nowadays have no idea what went on, during the war years.
But did you have to play down your Italian heritage? Did you celebrate Italian celebrations? And
we still had our celebrations. I think we were comfortable enough in our Americanism that we still did that. I can't recall that we became subdued in any way. I personally can't say that happened. It may, others may have experienced something, but I can truthfully say we didn't.
Sure. Well, we also know from studying other immigrant groups that although the nation is built on the story of new people coming to this nation, that there's often tensions between groups. Did you ever experience or feel a sense of tension between the Irish Americans, the German Americans, the Poles?
Well, we as teenage girls always were resentful when we found out that boys from our neighborhood were going to the Polish neighborhood and dating Polish girls. They had no right to do that. And, some then dated Irish girls and so on. And we thought that was very, very much being a traitor. But they did. I don't know what they found that was more exciting. Maybe it was just the idea of adventure, going into another neighborhood to date, or maybe they didn't want their mothers and fathers to know what they were up to. I don't know. But we kind of felt a little resentment of that. Then some of them married, and that's where it all started, and intermarriage and so on. I remember Mr. Joe Giusti, who was a veteran of Iwo Jima, had married this Polish girl. Her name was Helen, and she lived with her in-laws while Joe was away in the service. And she learned to speak Italian better than any Italian girl could speak, because her mother-in-law couldn't speak English, and nor could she speak Polish. So Helen became bilingual. She could speak Polish, Italian. She could speak, well, English, of course. But you know, that happened a lot. I think as we matured, we realized, you know, you fall in love. Then I fell in love with a Swedish German. How about that?
Well, so as a young woman, were you dating outside of the neighborhood? I mean, you're giving grief to the guys. I'm just wondering, you know, someone has to go on the other side too.
No, I dated Italian boys, but then this was after I was a graduate nurse and I was a more mature individual, and happened to be at a baptism where I met this young man, and we became friends, and then we became engaged and were married. So, but that was our resentment with going over to the Polish section of town and dating a Polish girl.
How did your mom feel about that?
About my
about the different ethnic groups? I mean, was it stay away from the Irish, or you know?
And P.A. Myers, and in the clothing department or in the alteration department, there were Scotch, there were Italians, there were Germans, and there were English, Irish, and of course Italians. So Mom worked in an integrated room, so she kind of got used to all of that. And then whenever I met Bob and brought him home for the first time, she was a little askance, and she's, you know, the typical, why don't you marry a nice Italian boy? And I think she got to know him and like him very much, and it was very difficult though for her to communicate with his parents. Not so much language-wise, but because they were German and Swedish and different customs, and they never warmed up to our way of doing things, and we never quite really warmed up to their way of doing things. But I think that's a natural reaction.
All right, so then we go through the war, and then we enter into the late 40s and early 50s, and during that time there was considerable fear amongst the American population about the power of the mob and insidious forces, and some of which may have been real, but I think a lot of it was hostility misplaced.
Right.
Did you see any of that?
I did see some of that. As a matter of fact, when we rented an apartment on West 18th Street, above a business that I won't mention, part of our rent was deducted because my father once a week would go down in the basement of our complex and burn numbers papers. I know sometimes Mom would send me down for a jar of tomatoes or a jar of peaches or something, and there'd be a table over in the corner of the cellar with men sitting around it with little green visors on their caps, a big lamp hanging over the table, and working with papers and so on. I never knew really what they were, but later on I found out that they were writing numbers. And that there were accumulation of numbers, and then my dad would burn them in the furnace once a week when they accumulated, and there was a deduction on our rent. So that's as far as I can remember that our family was involved in any way. But during the Prohibition time, you know, you were allowed to make 40 gallons of wine for home consumption, and I know there must have been some backdoor customers for some of the homes, although my dad he liked his wine too much, he never sold any. And there were people down the street who were referred to as Don and Donna, which is for the woman, Don for the man. And I don't know whether they were engaged in any kind of criminal activities, but I know that when our parents would walk past them, they would say, "Buongiorno, Don so-and-so," or "Buonasera, Donna so-and-so." And so we often wondered, are they in the rackets or what?
But I think there's certain element of hypocrisy and double standard in criticizing the Italian American community for that.
Definitely is.
Because Anglo-Americans were getting drunk, they were gambling too,
Right.
but because they controlled the instruments of power, the police and so forth, the targets became the ethnic populations.
Right.
So, but that changes with the emergence of political power in the Italian community.
A lot of political power.
Cannavino and
Yeah.
Tullio and
With Mayor Tullio. And there was a big rivalry there because Mike Cannavino and Lou Tullio were related. Mike Cannavino's brother was married to Lou Tullio's sister. So there was a family rivalry there too. But even before that, it was hard for the Italian American community to get integrated into some of the services. Eventually we had one policeman who was Italian, and then little by little more. And then Judge Jess Giulianti, the current Judge Jess Giulianti, his father was one of the first lawyers. And I remember talking to Joseph Agresti, who was also a very prominent lawyer in the Italian community, who wanted to practice law in Erie when he first graduated from law school. And he was told they already had an Italian lawyer and they didn't need another one. So in that sense, it was hard for them to break in to the professions. The doctors the same way. We had Dr. Frank Trippi, and then Dr. Sam Sciabetta, who established Rose Memorial Hospital in 1928 and closed it in 1938. But anyway, there was a time when Italians were reluctant to go to a hospital. That's where you died. And so Dr. Sciabetta opened up Rose Memorial Hospital to accommodate those who had this fear. They had an Italian doctor. They had a closer atmosphere. I think there were 10 beds and so on. But little by little, like 1938, 1940, hospitals became a little more accepted. And so we were kind of becoming more Americanized in our thinking. Our parents were, and as children who grew up and became nurses and doctors or lawyers and teachers and so on, we began letting our parents know that, things are different now. This is America. We're progressing. You can be proud of your children now, and you can, be more open in your Italianness.
Did you talk politics at the dinner table? What kind
Oh,
of...
yes, we did, but it was always Democrats at our table. When I was 21 years old, which just shows you how different young people are nowadays, how much more independent they are. When I was 21, my father said, "Come on, we're going down and register." He took me down and he said, "You register her Democrat." And that's what I registered as. There might have been households where they said, "You register Republican," I don't know, but it was always Democrat at our table.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't want to do the others. We don't want to interview the Republican Italian.
But anyway, that was it. Of course, Roosevelt was everybody's ideal president, and we all grew up with him, and our parents adored him because they thought he, did an awful lot, the New Deal.
Was there a point in growing up that you sought a more kind of a return to your tradition, a return to your heritage, where you said, I'm American, it's pretty clear now, but I want to go back and restore some of those things. Do you remember about when that happened and why?
And that may have happened like in the late 70s. That's when I became aware that there was an Italian American Women's Association, and I wanted to become a part of it. And then now, as I'm getting older, and I'm thinking, this is a tradition that's rich in its history, and I want my children to remember it and pass it on to their children. So we're being more and more engrossed in that mode, and comfortable with where we are in our life, in what we do and what we've accomplished, and want to go back and tie in. As a matter of fact, as my parents came here with no family, I've been back and forth to Italy 8 times and met all my relatives. And all my children have been there. And so that gives them that sense of, I know where my grandmother was born. I know, what my mother's telling me. I know what the food is like, what they do, what the history of the beautiful buildings and cathedrals and churches, and, what it was all about, walking into the Circus Maximum and thinking, oh my gosh, this is where Charlton Heston raced his chariots. So, I think we're more comfortable in our skin now, and we want to go back and capture, some of that essence of what it was like to be in that cocoon, of safety.
I'm going to check real quick. How much we got? About 20 minutes left? Okay. So, clearly food, I'm guessing, only because I'm envious of the Italian culture, is an important element.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When I went back to Italy for the first time, I said to my cousin, I really, because after my mom passed away and we all became more affluent, I very seldom ate polenta. Of course, right now, you walk, it's a gourmet food in, big restaurants. But I said to my cousin, I really would like a dish of polenta. And she said, are you crazy? Are you crazy? I said, no, I really would. She says, we don't eat polenta anymore. But then she made it, of course, and it brought back this flood of memories of this board where my mom would make the polenta, and then she would form it in a mold in a container and then dump it onto the board, and we'd cut it with a string, and everybody got their portion on their plate. And then some of the Italians made it, and then they spread it on the board and put sauce on it, and everybody had their spoon and ate in towards the middle from where they were sitting. So, food just brings back memories. You think all of a sudden you've forgotten something, and you remember. As a matter of fact, last night, I'm digressing a little bit. Last night I got a phone call from a woman whom I had not seen since 1951, when she moved out of Erie. And I said to her, oh, I remember your house so well. Your mom had a lamp that evolved. It evolved around the light bulb, and it was like Niagara Falls. She said, yeah, she said, I remember that lamp. And who thought of that? I hadn't thought about that, but it was such a revelation to think I remembered that. I said, it was like a lava lamp that they use now with, the bubbles coming down, but this evolved, and it was Niagara Falls. And she says, my goodness, I remember that too. But, food does, the memory of food, just stays with you. And even now, when I make something different, that I, maybe spaghetti, but with a different twist, and I think, I remember my mom making this. And it just kind of brings back a flood of memories, makes you feel good. And then when you make it and you invite your kids over and you say, Nana used to make this, and boy, this is really good, Mom, how did you make it? And then maybe they'll make it, so food is a very important part of our lives.
Sure. Your home was also probably filled with music, given that your father was a musician.
Absolutely, music. My father was such a devotee of opera, and my mother was too. But my father was home, my mother worked on Saturday, but there was no Saturday that we could go out and play at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, because Metropolitan Opera was on the air, and we had to sit and listen to the opera. And of course, I became quite an opera fan. I love music. And the only time we had a Saturday off was when it was Tannhauser or Wagner. and then we could go out and play because that wasn't Italian or French, because we did listen to Carmen, it was French. But that I think that's the way we as children became ingrained in some of these things. Somehow or other, I think families don't have that kind of discipline anymore. They would rebel. Children would rebel, I think, if you forced them to sit and listen to something for 3 hours or 3.5 or 4 hours. But it was something that you did because your parents said you should do it. And at first we were kind of resentful, but we got very knowledgeable because we were learning, we were absorbing things. And so, and then my father having had the background of music, that might have been in my blood, I don't know.
Did you have special Italian songs at
Yes.
celebrations?
Yes, our paisans would have mandolins, guitars, accordions, and anytime they got together, they had their instrument with them, and we would hear them sing, and we would learn the songs. To this day, I can still remember the words to some of the songs they sang.
Okay, well, do you know what my next question is?
You know, what are they?
Can
What
you,
are
can,
they?
can you sing,
Right,
can you sing a
yeah.
little for us? Or?
Well, they were.
I've never put that person on the spot like that, so this is one that you have the right to say no. But can you sing a little ditty for us?
Let me think. Oh, my goodness. La spagnola ci fa così, bocca bocca la notte di, stretti, stretti, stasi d'amor. La spagnola si fa così, bocca bocca la notte di. How's that?
Very nice.
It's about the Spanish girl who likes to sing and who likes to kiss. And so she's mouth to mouth all night long. Probably a ditty that kids shouldn't learn nowadays, but we learned it. They sang it, we learned it.
That's great. This is a
My
question-
husband would say, "Don't give up your day job."
Yeah, well. The last question on here, and I have some others as follows, but I want to get this in before we get short on time. What does being Italian mean to you?
What does it mean to me?
How do you see it as different from other nationalities?
Well, I think Italian to me is the warmth I project. I think it's my outgoing personality, the joy I see in things. It kind of gave me a feeling that now that I understand that it gave me a heritage to be proud of. I just see all pluses in it.
Now let me flip it. And how do you see being perhaps an Italian American in Erie different than perhaps elsewhere? Not that you may even know what it's like to be elsewhere, but is something special about Erie that?
Well, I think, truthfully, I think Erie doesn't have the prejudice that maybe other areas might have. I think if you're Italian American in, say, Wisconsin, or farther going towards the west, where then the Italian population is a little more diluted, because most people settled in the east, although California, of course, you know, with the vineyards and so on. But I think there's more of a closeness here. As I said, it felt like you were in a cocoon of safety. I really don't say that there was, I think Erie had the warmth to assimilate just about every nationality.
Little Italy is on a rebound
Yes.
now, but there for a while it was suffering.
It was suffering because there were homeowners, there were renters, but the culture of being Italian had pride in whatever you owned, you took good care of. And this isn't being disparaging in any way, but there was more of an after our generation moved out to supposedly better things. What moved in were transient. They weren't people who were hoping to stay there, to make their home there, to be part of any community there. It was kind of like a no man's land for a while. And now I think there's more stability beginning, where some of the homeowners that homes have been provided for them are beginning to be more, feeling more permanent. And then starting that rise in pride of neighborhood and so on. So maybe that's what's going to happen. But it'll never be Little Italy again, because it just won't. There's just all the conditions that made Little Italy what it was, a mass, integration, immigration of one nationality won't ever happen again. And so I just see it as a community that will be revitalized because of the new people that are living there. But if St. Paul still exists, it will always be the place to come home to. But then that'll just be that corner, 16th and Walnut. It won't be the whole community. Although I must say there are some people, maybe third generations, who are still clinging to their little residences.
We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to ask if you guys have any questions. If you know of any stories that you want to, you okay? That you want to poke her with, and you know that it's a great story and she didn't tell it, that this would be the opportunity. Or if you have anything that we haven't asked or you want to tell us, this is a good chance to do that. Is there any?
At what age did you move out of Little Italy?
Did I move out of Little Italy?
Yeah, did you move away?
I moved out in 1943, in the sense that I graduated from nursing training in 46. But in my senior year, because it was 4 years, I lived at home, and that was on 18th Street. But after that, I worked at St. Vincent for a year or two. Then I married and moved to Ohio because of my husband's work. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, and then my parents, my mother and my two sisters bought their home in the 50s, early 50s, and moved to 38th and Cherry. And so that was the 50s was the end of our Little Italy, living there.
What about social activities? What did you do for fun? Whether you were a teenager growing up in Little Italy, or what did your mom do for fun? Okay. What did people do for fun?
Well, most of our fun was going visiting. As children, we would tag along. Mama always took us. We had no babysitters. Took us to visit the neighbors, the women, and they would sit and have coffee, and there'd be cookies. They'd always serve cookies or some sort of sweet. And my mother always said, now remember, you look at that plate and you count the people in the room, and you take one cookie, and that's all, because there has to be some for everybody else. And so that's what we did. And as little children, we would play in the neighborhood. We'd play nip, which was you took a piece of broomstick and twiddled both ends to points, and then you used the other end of the broomstick, which you had cut off, to hit it, and it would flip, and then you'd walk up to it, and you'd hit it and flip it, and then everybody got a chance to do that, and you won if you flipped it the farthest. And we played kick the can. The cans were free. You could kick the can, see how far you could kick it, or you could swoosh the can with your foot, and then you could walk with it. And or you could take a skate apart, a roller skate apart, and put it on a board, underneath on a board. This would have been the first skateboards, and then you put a crate on it, and then you'd have a scooter. You'd put handles on it, and then you'd use it as a scooter. We didn't really have toys that you bought in the store. Heavens to Betsy. That came a lot later. And then as teenagers, we walked. We walked to State Street. we'd buy an ice cream cone at Hill Mill, walk back home again, and tell stories to each other. We would lie. We would, tell stories, embellish them, and, fantasy stories and so on. And we would try to outdo each other with our stories.
At what age did you have your first friend that wasn't of Italian descent?
My first friend, that was when I went to Roosevelt School,
So that was at
and that was, I was, 12 then.
12?
Yeah, uh-huh. And I went to an American home, and I had peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And boy, was that a revelation.
Did you like it or not?
Oh, I loved it. I thought, oh my goodness, that's good. Peanut butter and jelly on American bread. Oh my goodness, that was really what a treat that was. But, and then, because we did get peanut butter in our box, but it was the kind where it was like packed solid on the bottom and this much oil on top, and then you had to keep stirring and stirring and stirring, and then it would stick to your palate and try to get it down. So we didn't eat it too often. But we did have, my mom made jelly, but we put that on Italian bread, but we never thought of combining the two. But
when you're in this American home, what are you thinking about how different it is?
Well, it was different in the sense it didn't have all these pictures on the wall of grandmas and grandpas and aunts and uncles and crucifixes and Last Suppers and all the things that were in our home. And they had furniture that had doilies on them, antimacassars they call them. And then I told my mom about it, and I said, we're going to get a new couch, and you should get those for it, because when you put your head back, they're very nice. They're really, and they're so pretty. And so my mom would get them, and that's how we started to, I'd get ideas from my friends' homes and so on. And I'll never forget the first telephone we got. As a matter of fact, it had to be, I bet I was 16 years old when we finally got a telephone. And we had to learn how to dial it. We didn't have, and then we had to teach my mother how to dial it. I can't think now what she would think about a cell phone. I really can't, but it's strange how you, little by little, you started, kind of becoming more and more American, and now we're going back and want to be more and more Italian.
Well, let me ask you a question. This is kind of a question. I do a lot of interviews with the Sisters of St. Joseph, okay? And so I ask them this kind of question. I'm gonna throw it at you. If you could say anything to the camera, to future generations of Italian American women, the next generation and down the line, what would you say to these young women of Italian American heritage? And I'm going to ask that you actually look straight at the camera and say that.
Okay, well, what I would say to young Italian American women now, because they would be like the third generation now, third and fourth generation, is to think back to where your heritage began, how far you can remember, and think of the accomplishment that those people made before you, and then for you to be proud of that, but then to go on in whatever direction you want to go and be the best person that you can be, so that future generations will be able to look back at you and help you and realize where you came from and the kind of a life that you led. Your career, whatever it is, your life ambition, realize it and do the best you can.
Very good. We have literally 50 seconds left, so that, I think we can say, concludes this portion. If you want to ask more questions, we'll need to load up a new tape. Thank you very much.
I wanted to show you, this is Audrey's book, but this is the book I co-authored about China. A formal photo of my father and my mother and me as a baby, taken at Wagner Studios on 18th Street Photographs were really important to the Italian immigrant because they could send them back then to their relatives in Italy to show them how well they were doing or how far they had come in their, life in America. And Bagnarelli was always very, very busy because there were communion pictures and confirmation pictures, baptism pictures, and those were pictures that very proudly were displayed to the families in Italy, as I said, to show them how well they were doing in this country.
But having photos would not have been a common thing. I mean, not an everyday thing like we do today.
No.
No, there's another one in here.
Very few people showed the one of the band. It's a
Yeah,
chapter on.
Did I pass it?
Let me think here.
Where is
That's an early restaurant. Let's see, professions. Musicians. Yeah. This was Champoni's band, which
This right
was
there.
the premier band in the Italian community, and they played at the Park Opera House for plays and operas, and it was founded by Mr. Champoni.
And your father is the second from
He's
the end there?
Yes, he's at the end here, trombonist in the orchestra.
So he's the very end person.
Very end
Okay.
in the second row. On
But that was his sole employment.
yes,
And that's pretty impressive that an Italian immigrant can come and be entirely employed and self-sufficient off
Right.
of being a musician. Were
Yeah.
all the individuals that way, do you think?
I don't know, but most of them were Italian. Champoni's band was mostly Italian. Very talented musicians. Music was part of the Italian culture, and they loved to play instruments.
Okay, so now let's take a look at the young Norma Webb.
Oh, God in heaven.
Do you still have that nurse's uniform?
Hmm?
Do you still have the nurse's uniform?
No, I don't, but I have my cap.
Do you?
Yeah. They were all hand done by the nuns. This is my
one here.
picture as a young student nurse. I had just completed my probationary period, and I was capped. And of course, that was an occasion for my mother to have my picture taken so she could send it to Italy.
How old were you at this point?
I was 18,
Okay, and where were you going to school?
St. Vincent's School of Nursing
Okay, you got to inform
here
me.
in Erie.
Oh, it was, okay.
Mhm. Yeah, we had a School of Nursing. It closed in 1989 or 90.
It was a school that then moved out to Mercyhurst Northeast. So when St. Vincent closed their nursing school,
Mhm.
Mercyhurst Northeast picked that up.
Oh, I did not know
Right,
that.
and so did Villa.
Mm.
And then eventually Gannon.
Okay, so do we have any other photos you want to make sure get onto this tape? Friends, old boyfriends, anything?
No.
I mean, he can leave the room while you tell us.
Did you see that quick peek over to Bill?
No, but here's a picture of Lou Tullio. Let's see, where's that? Our
No.
mayor.
Norma, were you involved in any other clubs other than the
Oh,
Italian American Women's Association?
yeah, the Women's Welfare League and St. Vincent's Auxiliary.
Oh my,
Oh,
okay.
yeah. I've been a member of St. Vincent's Auxiliary for 45 years.
Oh my goodness.
Delivered mail. Yeah, this
Here's
is
what I think we'll do. We can turn off the